Oh hey, didn't see you there. You know, if there's one thing I like doing, it's learning world history. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So let's get right into it.
So although much of 20th century history was dominated by violent conflicts, many individuals and groups, even including some states, opposed this trend of violence, and even showed others how they could solve these issues using non-violent tactics. One person who is an excellent example of this during the 20th century was Mohandas Gandhi, who used his non-violent philosophy to resist British rule and even bring political change to India. Now, although Gandhi and other members of the Indian resistance against British rule were fighting tirelessly for their independence, they showed people in India and around the world that they could gain their independence peacefully. Another great example would be Martin Luther King Jr. He was an American Baptist minister and a well-known activist in the civil rights movement during the 1950s and 1960s, pushing for rights and equal treatment of African Americans, especially in the southern United States. Martin Luther King Jr. had a strong belief in nonviolent protests, and his ideals helped to set the tone for the entire civil rights movement. Although racism and violence were prominent at the time, he was still able to peacefully get his message through to the government and people of America. My final example is Nelson Mandela, who was a South African anti-apartheid revolutionary, political leader, and philanthropist. He served as the first black president of South Africa from 1994 until 1999. Nelson Mandela had a long fight against racial prejudice in South Africa, but he used nonviolence to work towards equality. Even after being imprisoned, he continued to show other South Africans and people across the world that equality could be gained through nonviolence. Even though the majority of the 20th century was dominated by violent conflicts, all three of these men taught people how to fight for what matters most to them without using violence, even though the majority of people may not have agreed with their ideas. These examples show that you can still let your voice be heard and even change the world without using violence.
Hey, what's up guys? Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, make sure to go down there and just smash that like button. If we can hit 17 likes on this video, I'm going to be giving away tickets to a Japanese-American baseball game in the next video.
My